Houston, we have a problem. In the previous nugget, we added Active Directory. We also introduced a Windows 10 client. However, when I launched the lab today and brought up the new lab as a result of that, DNS was not working. And I thought to myself, I could just solve this and put it in the lab for the next go around and they would never know. But then I thought, you probably also want to see the steps taken to troubleshoot it. It's also a great opportunity to leverage what we've already learned and put those into practice to verify what the problem is. So here's what we have. We have a computer. We have a Windows 10 client that's at .120. This is the 192.168.1.0 network. We have our Windows 2016 server right here, which is now named DCNUG, and that's at .100. And the Windows 10 computer is acting as a DNS client to the DNS server. And when I brought the lab up, the problem is that this Windows 10 machine cannot get a name resolution for google.com or any other names that it's trying to resolve. So what you and I are going to do is go into the existing lab topology as it is for this video, and we're going to troubleshoot this together step by step. The first thing I'd like to do is log on to our Windows 10 client as the administrator on the domain. Now, there's a couple ways of logging on as administrator. We could use this format here, administrator@nuggetlab.com as the username, or we could put the domain name, nuggetlab/ and then the username of administrator. Either one of those would imply that we're logging on as the domain administrator account on this Windows 10 computer. And then we'll simply supply our lab password. And with our lab password supplied, we'll go ahead and log on. Fantastic. Let's go ahead and bring up PowerShell on this local Windows 10 computer. We're using the taskbar icon right here for the scripting environment. Let's just type in ping space www.google.com, and then we'll press F8 to go ahead and execute just that. And you'll notice that in the output window here, google.com, that ping is not successful, and that's because name resolution is failing for it. So right there, it could not find host www.google.com, name resolution was failing. So that could be a couple of reasons. It could be we have no connectivity at all, IP-wise, or it could just be that name resolution is failing. Now, there are additional tools that we could use for name resolution, but if we just wanted to verify basic IP connectivity, we could do a ping out to 8.8.8.8, and then press F8 to execute just that. And that's working. So that implies that our default gateway is working, IP connectivity is working, and that what we're facing here is a name resolution issue. So I'm going to use this icon right here, the little squeegee, to clear the console pane. And let's open up a second tab over to our DCNUG server. To do that, we can click on File, and then from the drop-down select New Remote PowerShell tab, or we could do a Control-Shift-R as a shortcut to open up a new tab to a remote server. So we'll select New Remote PowerShell tab. We'll put in the name of DC-NUG, and because we're already authenticated as the administrator on the domain, if we click on Connect, we should go ahead and be able to get a new tab for that. So now we have a new tab for DCNUG, and this indicates the server that we're on as well. So the first tab is for our local computer, our local Windows 10 machine, and this second tab called DCNUG is a PowerShell window for our Windows 2016 server DCNUG. And if we want to see the script pane for that as well, we just go ahead with DCNUG selected, click on View, and then click on Show Script Pane or do a Control-R to bring that up. From here, we might want to verify basic IP connectivity for our DNS server. We can do that with ping space 8.8.8.8, press F8 to execute that. That works. That's a good sign. So our domain controller and DNS server has basic IP connectivity. And next, let's go ahead and use a squeegee to clear the output. Next, let's go ahead and do a ping out to www.google.com just to see whether or not the DNS server itself has the ability to resolve names to IP addresses. So we'll go ahead and press F8 to execute line 2, and it looks like it does not. So let's think about this for a moment. If this internal server, this Windows 2016 server, cannot resolve names to IP addresses on the internet, and we have verified basic connectivity out to the internet based on IPs, what would cause that? Well, if we have a forwarder configured, it should be forwarding the request to that forwarding DNS server for the resolutions. And I've got another question for you. If there are no forwarders configured on our DNS server, what is it going to use to go ahead and be able to walk the DNS tree for name resolution? What's it using as a seed, if you will, to get the ball rolling to do a tree walk in DNS? And if you're saying, Keith, I know, it's the root hints, you'd be absolutely correct. So let's take a closer look at this Windows 2016 server using the DNS manager and take a look and see whether or not we have forwarders configured. And if there is no forwarder present, we can take a look and verify that the root hints are okay. So back on our Windows 10 machine, let me go ahead and minimize just for a moment the integrated scripting environment. And let's go ahead and launch Server Manager from the taskbar on the client machine. Now, to run the DNS manager against our DC NUG server, we have a couple options here. We can click on all servers on the left-hand side and then right-click on the DC NUG and launch DNS manager from there. Or we could go to DNS on the left, which also would reveal our DC NUG, where we could right-click and select the DNS manager from the dropdown. Either way is going to launch DNS manager against that remote server. So we'll go ahead and launch it. The first thing I'd like to check is whether or not we have any forwarders configured. We can get there by right-clicking on the DC NUG server and then going to Properties and then clicking on Forwarders, and it shows that there is none there. Or another way of looking at the forwarders would be to simply, with DC NUG selected, go ahead and double-click on Forwarders. That would bring it up as well with that tab already selected. So we have no forwarders. That's one reason why we're not sending DNS requests off to the public internet. However, even with no forwarders, we should still be able to use the route hints to go ahead and get there. So there's a tab right here for route hints in the properties of the DNS server. And another way of getting to that same place is with DC NUG selected, simply double click on the route hints on the right, and that brings up that tab of the DC NUG properties as well. And here's what I'm noticing. We have two route hints there, and that's because we deleted all the others in a previous nugget when we talked about route hints. But as I look over to the right, I only see IPv6 addresses. I don't see any IPv4 addresses. And I know at one point when we were looking at this, we had both IPv6 and IPv4 addresses for those route hints. So for whatever reason, the IPv4 is gone, and this computer does not have IPv6 connectivity yet out to the internet, so it can't actually walk the tree because it can't reach an IPv6 global address. So to correct that, what we could do is we could select the top one here, the a.root-servers.net, and with it selected, we'll go ahead and click on Edit, and then up here, we'll just click on Resolve. And look at this, it's not working. We can't resolve it. Why is that? And the reason for that is we don't have even a single forwarder, and we don't have a reachable route hint because we're not yet connected with IPv6 to the internet. So to solve this, what we could do, we'll cancel the Edit Name Server Record dialog box. And back at the properties of DC NUG for DNS, we'll go to Forwarders, and we need to add at least one forwarder temporarily so we can resolve and at least get some IPv4 addresses associated with our route hints. So to add a forwarder, we can do that in PowerShell, or since we're right here, we'll simply click on Edit and type in 8.8.8.8, click on OK, and click on Apply. Now if we go over to route hints and we edit the a.root-servers.net by having it selected and click on Edit, now if we click on Resolve, it can go ahead and resolve it to an IPv4 address because it's using the forwarder address to do the initial resolution for us. So we'll click on OK there. And let's do the same thing for b.root-servers.net. By highlighting it, clicking on Edit, and clicking on Resolve, that also resolves to a reachable IPv4 address. We'll click on OK. And then now if we wanted to get rid of our forwarders, because we have route hints, we can go ahead and select this forwarder, click on Edit, and then select it and click on Delete, and click on OK. And then click on Apply. And we'll click on OK to close that dialog window. So now, if we go back to PowerShell as an example, let's add a couple commands to clear the cache. We'll do a clear -d, and we'll say DNS server cache on the server. And over on our client, which is our Windows 10 machine, let's also add a couple clear commands. We'll do a clear, and we'll select DNS client cache here, which is the equivalent on a Windows 10 client of an ipconfig/flush DNS. And let's do an ipconfig/display DNS just to make sure, and then we can go ahead and do the ping again. And this is just to make sure that nothing is cached either on the client or on the server before we make the request. So let's go to the server tab, and on the server tab we'll do a clear DNS server cache. With that highlighted, we'll press F8 to execute that. We'll click on yes to confirm, and for grins, let's also do a show-DNS server cache as well. We'll press F8 to execute that just to verify what's there to begin with. So the cache is pretty clean. We have two name servers. That's the A and B root servers. And those name server records are referring to specific A records, which actually have the address of those two name servers, which are the 198.41 and the 192.228 addresses respectively. So now if we go back to our client, just by clicking on the PowerShell tab for the Windows 10 machine, we'll go ahead and display our cache with ipconfig/display DNS and pressing F8 to execute that. And it has a bunch of information in there. Let's go ahead and clear it. So I'll highlight row 3, which is clear DNS client cache. We'll do F8, and then we'll go ahead and do an ipconfig/display DNS and execute that with an F8 as well. There we go. So we still had a DNS resolution that happened between the clear and the display, but at the moment we only have this single entry in our client cache. So if we were to do something like ping out to google.com, and we'll highlight row number 1 and press F8 to do that, that now works. And if we go over to the DC Nug tab, and we use the squeegee here to clear the console pane, and then we execute line 4 again by highlighting it and pressing F8, that's going to show us our DNS server cache. And in there, what we're going to find, if we scroll up a little bit here, we are going to find www.google.com as part of the cache, which is right here. We can also see the results of a lot of other queries it made, including the name servers associated with google.com and their associated IP addresses, which are right here, which allowed the query and discovery for www.google.com as it resolved to this IP address ending in .100. In this nugget, we've not only reinforced our previous learning, but we also applied our skills in troubleshooting, where we have a client who was using a local DNS server that was unable to do DNS requests. And the reason for that, it had no DNS forwarders, and it didn't have a valid reachable IP address in its root hints. And that's required if that DNS server is going to walk the DNS tree with its iterative queries to perform name resolution on behalf of its clients. And the good news is the lab associated with this nugget gives you the exact opportunity to practice and reinforce what we've done in this nugget. So have some fun in the lab, reinforcing those skills, and I'll see you, my friend, in the next nugget. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.